Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Self-Publishing Tips and Tricks Show, a series designed to give you insight into the world of self-publishing and marketing your books. I'm Shannon, writing under the pen name of S.T. Houston, and I'm here today with my co-hosts.
I'm Ben Pick.
And I'm Morgan Lee.
And we're here today with indie author and video content creator on YouTube, Estelle Van de Velde. She's recently translated her book into another language, so she's going to share everything she learned and the different methods of translating your work and marketing it for different speaking audiences. Before we jump into the interview, let's catch up on some news and points of interest for us. And note that we are recording this in February, and this episode won't air until our third season, which starts in July.
I don't have anything planned for the summer. I'm still going to be working on my third book, and I'm going to be posting weekly videos of questionable writing advice through running metaphors every Monday night at 7 p.m. So hopefully I'll see you there. I'll also be starting my new season there, so I'll be finishing up in April towards May and then shifting over to the fifth season. And again, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Hopefully I'll see you there.
So I too do not know what I will be doing in July. My plan is to have book 3 ready, almost ready to be published. I'm thinking of publishing it at the end of either October or September. So I'll be gearing up for the publication of the third book in my series. And that's about all that I have planned.
And come July, we are having just finished the AuthorTube Writing Conference. So if you've not caught that on YouTube, we have a whole panel and wonderful guests who are speaking about the act of writing and or publishing your books. So please check that out. We'll have the link to the AuthorTube Writing Conference in the show notes and in the description link below. And for me personally, I will have my Kickstarter going for my first book of my next series. It is actually starting right before the AuthorTube Writing Conference, but as of listening to this episode, it is still going, and I would appreciate anybody who would love to support and help me get that first book out to the world for my next series. So I'm looking forward to that. So today, let's talk about our guest. Estelle Van de Velde is a Belgian indie author and video content creator on YouTube. She has a master's in creative writing from Brunel University, London, has 10 years experience in marketing, and is passionate about all things self-publishing. She published her travel memoirs back in 2021 called The Londoners, an expat's memoirs and survival guide to the UK. On her YouTube channel, Estelle is documenting her journey as an author while giving lots of insights on marketing and self-publishing. She's also a mama writer. Her son was born in May of 2022, and she takes care of him when not writing or working on her author business. Now let's welcome our guest to the screen. Hello and welcome, Estelle. Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself and talk about anything we might have missed?
Yeah, sure. So hi, Shannon, Morgan, and Ben. I'm so happy to be here with you today. It's an honor, really. You already did a great introduction, Shannon. I would simply add that I offer 30-minute coaching sessions on my website, so you can book me and pick up my brain on marketing and self-publishing questions you may have.
And you also offer a service for those who are on YouTube publishing content as well?
Not really, but I do offer book formatting services on Fiverr as well.
Okay, that must have been what I was remembering. So something else was in there. And I would definitely push you guys to try to, get her help. She's very good at the book marketing, which we'll learn about a little bit today. She actually has videos on Amazon ads, which we're also going to ask her about a little bit today. Well, before we jump into that process of translating your work, self-publishing it, and marketing it, could you tell us what made you want to start writing and self-publish that first book?
Yeah, so I have been writing since I'm about 10. It all started with a fan fiction I wrote for my sisters and I in the world of Pokemon. After that, I participated in a written role-play game set in a fantasy world. It was all part of a forum. In 2011, I participated in my first NaNoWriMo, which I won. But I think this specific story will never see the light of day. And I always kept writing for as long as I can remember. I'm Belgian, though, from the French-speaking part of the country. I've been very much influenced by French literature, as you can guess. And, back in the early 2010s, they had a very weird way to look at creativity. When I say they, I mean French people, because writing good stories was considered a gift. It wasn't something you worked on. It was something you were born with, right? So when I moved to London, UK in 2015, and I found out there were creative writing courses, I enrolled in a master's in creative writing at Brunel University, London. It was the best thing I ever did for my writing and actually for myself too, because I always felt a little bit out of place, and I had found my people there, like literally. It's also the time I heard about self-publishing, which started to become less frowned upon. I listened religiously to the Creative Pen podcast hosted by Joanna Penn, read David Gobran's blog, discovered the world of authortube on YouTube, and the simple fact that you keep control of your work when self-publishing appealed to me like greatly. So I decided to try, and I released a short story called Finding Maxwell in February 2017. And with it, I learned a ton about the do's and don'ts of indie publishing, about cover design, never do it yourself if you don't have any graphic design skills, and book marketing. In the end, I unpublished Finding Maxwell in December 2021, but it definitely helped me grow as an author and self-publisher for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the cover designs. I have no artistic talent whatsoever, and I was thrilled with the designs I have. But of course, Shannon, yes, I'm pointing the right direction right now. Shannon made her own covers, and they look absolutely beautiful. So it is, depending on your level of skill, yes, if you have the skills to do it, go for it. If you don't, yeah, that's something you gotta.
Yeah, that's definitely.
What is your first language, and what language do you write in when you're first drafting your work?
And that's actually a good one. You may have recognized it for my accent. I'm a French speaker. Not from France, though, but from Belgium. We have three-ish official languages in Belgium, which are French, Dutch, and German. But I only do speak French, not the other two, I'm afraid, and English, of course. Back in the early days, I wrote mainly in French, but since my master's in creative writing, I switched to English. And that's because I felt I had more freedom writing in English than French. And hear me out. Weirdly enough, I am kind of stuck in French with all the grammar and spelling rules. I feel like it needs to be perfect from the get-go because I am a perfectionist. However, writing in English allows me to overcome that perfectionism in the sense that, of course, there are grammar and spelling rules I need to follow, like in any languages, but I know I am not a native speaker, so I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself more freedom, which I don't in my native language.
Could you tell us a little bit about your book, The Londoners, published in 2021, and what the genre is?
Yeah, sure. So I lived in the UK from 2015 until roughly 2019. When my husband and I moved back to Belgium, I thought I needed a way to remember that time. It's a way to celebrate the fact that we moved to another country and then came back. So that's how the idea of The Londoners came up. I wanted to tell my immigration story, how I learned to speak English because I was really bad at it at the beginning. How I went to uni, found a job, found a flat, and simply lived in London, you know. So it's a travel memoir, but it's also a how-to guide. There's a part of the book that is explaining all the admin stuff that we needed to do, how the university system works, which is very different from how it works in my country, for example. Not that different from the US, I think, but from Belgium, yes, that's definitely different, and so on and so forth. So The Londoners is really an ode to that special time in my life.
So the fact that you said that you allow yourself to make mistakes by using English as the writing language, I think that's very fascinating. It's almost like a way for us that we should like, oh, maybe we should learn another language and then write in that language so that we won't be so much of a perfectionist. Because I think that's many of us who are writers. We evaluate every word as we put it down on the page.
Yeah, exactly. And when writing, I always have the dictionary open on my desktop. But that's because sometimes I have this French word popping in my head, but I don't really have the English translation of it right now. But mainly when I'm writing, I have English flowing in my head, like right away. So
nice. And I want to throw a question out to you because maybe I knew, but maybe I didn't remember that you were a fan of Joanna Penn, the Creative Pen podcast. Now she just put out a travel memoir. Has anything of her process like influenced like how you might look at your book now?
I haven't read the memoir yet, but I plan on buying it and read it for sure because it's really interesting to know how she wrote it and try to actually compare it to mine,
Yeah.
see if that works. But no, I haven't really been influenced by her when writing my own memoir.
Yeah. Well, I think I was looking more like her marketing and how, because, she did a Kickstarter for her memoir. Now the
Yeah, she
Kickstarter is
did.
over, but I am really interested to see what else she does with that, because her travel memoir, that's way different than anything else she's written. It's not a nonfiction book for writers, and it's not her mystery novels.
Well, to be honest, when I wrote The Londoners, I didn't think about marketing it before actually getting it out in the world, I didn't think about all that. I just wanted a book out.
Yeah.
I thought about marketing after getting it published, actually.
Yeah, I think most of us do when we start dipping our toes in. And I know you were very thoughtful in your process with your French translation, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here, and the marketing, because you had a very specific reason for translating it for a marketing purpose. Let's talk about that. Last year in 2022, you decided to translate your book, The Londoners, into French. Can you tell us what led you to this decision?
It wasn't so much a business decision than a let's jump off the cliff kind of thing, My family and friends are all from Belgium, except for a few exceptions, and not all of them understand English. So when I self-published The Londoners in English, some people were very frustrated because they couldn't understand a thing I wrote, but still wanted to read me and my work. And one of my cousins in particular couldn't help but ask me for a French translation every time that we would see each other. He had already read the English version and was persuaded the translation would be a bestseller. Like, he was persuaded. And it's true that a lot of French people are interested in going abroad. So I thought, why not? I doubted it would become a bestseller, but there were enough people asking for a French translation to actually bother doing it. And that's actually also the time where I booked myself a table at a Christmas market. And I thought, oh, shoot, I need a French translation, otherwise I will sell nothing.
That's what I remember from your YouTube videos, that you made the decision to translate because that way you would have the translation ready for that table.
Yeah.
What was your process for translating your book?
So as a French native speaker and someone who works in content marketing, I knew that I had all the tools and knowledge needed to translate the book myself. The Londoners is not a lengthy book. It's roughly 120 pages long. So I estimated I could translate it in a few weeks. It actually took more than 2 months. The stages for translating it were pretty much the same as when drafting and editing a book from scratch. The only difference is that I already had a complete manuscript. So I used DeepL.com to help me translate the rough draft, so draft 1. DeepL is an AI that I often use for translations in various languages, especially when a Dutch speaker asks me a question and I don't know what it means or how to answer properly. But translation AIs are often flawed. You can't notice they make mistakes unless you are a native speaker. And believe me, even if DeepL.com did a great job translating The Londoners, there were a ton of sentences that just could have been written in a more beautiful way, put it that way. So I rolled up my sleeves and deeply edited draft 2. That's the stage in which I completely rewrote the manuscript. I can't stress it out enough, but when using an AI to translate a text, you can't use the translation it created, because that stage took a while. I had to juggle the translation and take care of a newborn baby at the time. But between naps and feedings, there's actually plenty of time to work. And when draft 2 was completed, I let it sit for a week, then asked my mom to read it for grammar and spelling, while I also read it on my side to check if everything was making sense in the way I wanted it to. And when draft 3 was completed, I double-checked it for any weird things I had left inside. And then I had a good enough translation to self-publish, or to my taste, actually.
So what would an author need to translate their own work themselves?
I would say they need an excellent knowledge of the language they're translating their work in. Without it, it's nearly impossible to translate a book yourself and think you have a good enough translation. And because Even if AIs have evolved and have made great improvements since the beginning, they're still not perfect. They do not have the deep knowledge of the language than a native speaker has. They don't have the granularity, nor their translations are idiomatic enough to pass as a native speaker. So I would recommend any author who is thinking of translating their work themselves to have a good look at their language skills and be honest with themselves. If they have the level of a native speaker in that particular language, then go for it. If not, they may want to hire somebody to do it for them.
And that's a great segue into our next question, which is, what cost can author expect of hiring someone else to translate their work?
So as someone who works with freelancers and agencies for translation tasks, I can tell you that on average, they ask 12 cents per word when translating from English to French and vice versa. But that price varies according to the language you're translating to. It would be higher for a translation to German, for example. And that's because it depends on the language difficulty, the level of the freelancer, and how many freelancers there are on the market to fulfill that demands. So yeah, 12 cents per word. Let's say you're translating a 50,000 words manuscript, and that represents 6,000 euros. Not everyone can pull this up for sure.
I actually just attended a free webinar where Reezy was the guest that was speaking, and they talked about how you can hire translators and things like that on their website. And I think they put the average was US dollars was around 8,000 for a translator. And then they suggested that even after you get a translator and hire them, that you go back onto Reezy, and this doesn't have to be necessarily Reezy, but you go back and you hire someone who can edit the book in that language as well and hire them to edit the book. So that it could be quite costly, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah, that 8,000 price tag is already more than, a couple of rounds, multiple rounds of editors. So it is definitely an investment to translate your book to another language. On that note, is there any other way to have your book translated than to do it yourself or to hire a translator?
So I thought of two ways you could actually do that. The first one is to translate the manuscript using the AI I mentioned, so deepl.com, and then hire a native speaker copy editor to check the translation for you. And I saw, before this interview, I saw someone on Fiverr do it for 10 euros for 1,000 words. So that would represent roughly 500 euros for your 50,000 words manuscript. It's way less than hiring a translator, but still budget. The second way is to sell your international rights for translation in a specific language. I know that British indie author Sacha Black, you might know her through her books for writers or a podcast called the Rebel Author Podcast. She has sold her translation rights to a publishing house for her books to be translated into Korean. That's something she couldn't do herself, so she was happy to do it with a publishing house. She had nothing to pay upfront. The costs were supported by the publishing house, and now she's a hybrid author because she has a foot in each publishing world, traditional publishing and self-publishing. It could be something you could dig into as a self-published author if you'd like your books translated at some point, but make sure you are represented by an agent specialized in international rights so you get the best deal possible.
Are you comfortable discussing any publishing missteps or things you would have liked to have done differently with the translation of your work?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I had estimated I would be able to translate my book within the span of a few weeks, which actually turned to a few months. I thought it would be easy because it was my own book and because I was used to translating from English to French with the type of day job I have, and silly me for thinking it would be that easy, even though I'm a French speaker. And translating a book is different from translating a blog post or a commercial leaflet, I am way pickier, so it took ages. And I was afraid that I wouldn't get my book ready for the event that I was going at as an author. So it was definitely very scary. I also did not do a proper launch for the French translation because I thought that as my audience consists mainly of English speakers, they wouldn't be bothered with a French book. I realize now that it was a mistake and I should have launched it just like I did with the English version.
I was following your process on your YouTube channel when you were talking about, okay, I want to have this done by December for the booth. And I followed you along while everything was taking so much time. But what I admired was that even though you may have thought you only needed a few weeks to do it, you started the process way in advance. So even though it took you months, you were still ready to go, which I thought that was just brilliant.
Yeah, that's just my way of doing things. It's starting like way in advance, so I don't have the fear of self-publishing it at the very last minute.
Yeah. Well, if you could only pass on one thing to aspiring self-published writers, what is your best self-publishing tip or trick?
I would say your book is a product. So make it as best as it can possibly be. That includes taking steps you would normally skip, but are essential to the making of a great product. And I'm not only talking about story editing, but also about cover design and book formatting. What would make a reader pick up your book instead of another one? That's the question you need to answer. And actually, I have another tip to pass on. And that's because I've seen too many people getting disappointed or burnt out because of this. You won't be a bestseller overnight. I know it's very easy to think you can be very successful with self-publishing just by watching videos on YouTube by successful indie authors, for example. But you never know how long the author has struggled to reach the point they're at today. And you never know their personal and financial situations. It can take years. It takes a huge amount of work on your end. You, as the author, have to be prepared for it. And of course, you're going to want to compare yourself with them, but it's a very bad idea. Do what makes sense to you and your own situation. Don't spend 2,000 euros to self-publish one book if you can't afford it.
That is wonderful advice. And I'd like to shift over from the publishing to the marketing side of this, as you've done a lot with Amazon ads. What advice would you give to an author looking to use Amazon ads?
Don't run Amazon ads for the sake of running Amazon ads. That's my advice. As with everything else, the type of marketing you do depends very much on the type of books you have written. What genre have you written in? What audience is it aimed at? You need to think about where your readers are looking for new books. If that's Amazon, then great. If not, then you might just want to run ads on another platform instead of Amazon. Another advice is to learn from the best. Brian Cohen is your go-to person for Amazon ads. He published 50 plus books on Amazon KDP, hosts the Sell More book show podcast, and more importantly, he runs the 5-day Amazon Ads Profit Challenge. Honestly, that's mainly how I learned how to do Amazon ads myself, by participating in his quarterly challenge, and do so more than once. You learn better by doing instead of reading.
Yes, and he runs that course several times a year, and it's free for those first 5 days. If you want more in-depth details and class structure, you can pay for more time, but those 5 days are free.
So do you now run Amazon ads for your translation?
Yeah, that's a good one. Not currently, no, but that's because I wanted to try Facebook ads to reach French readers. You see, I created my Facebook page back in the early 2010s. I think it was 2011 actually, when I mostly wrote in French. So I have a small following of French people there and wanted to use the lookalike function on Facebook to find readers with the same profile as my French followers. And to be honest, it doesn't seem to work as of today, but that's still the early days of my ads. So I need to fine tune them before saying it works or it doesn't work. But I will certainly try to get a few reviews on the French translation before running Amazon ads. That's for sure.
So then for the Amazon ads that you run on your English language book, how often do you run them and how do you measure if they are successful or not?
My book is in low competition categories. Travel memoirs aren't as popular as romance or fantasy, for example. So I try to run ads whenever there's a holiday, right before Christmas, for example, during summertime, anything like that. And because it's the season when people tend to read the most or offer books as gifts, there are more chances they buy my book for this very reason. And the keywords that I'm using are very low competition. So I don't pay a huge amount of money to run my ads, which is good. As of how do I measure if they're successful? That's a more technical question, but basically, if the royalties I get from Amazon are higher than the money I spend on ads, I consider they are indeed successful. The ROI, or return on investment, has to be positive. And be careful though that even if Amazon tells you how many sales you get, you need to calculate what your royalties are. Because when on the Amazon Ads dashboard, you will see the total amount you sold for, not the royalties. Let's say your paperback is sold at $7.99, you will see $7.99 on your dashboard, not the $2.99 royalties you're getting from Amazon at the end of the day. See what I mean? So you have to calculate the exact amount you're getting from those ads.
That is impressive because a lot of us have the exact opposite strategy where we're explicitly trying not to buy Amazon ads before Christmas because they jack up the prices for them. But yeah, if you're in the low competition category, that is something entirely different to consider because you are in a completely different venue with your memoir than somebody with a fantasy novel or something along those lines would be trying to sell their book with.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't do that if I was, marketing a fantasy or romance book, because then the prices would be so much higher.
You said you experimented with Facebook as well as those Amazon ads. What, if any, other type of marketing do you do for your translated book? And do you do anything differently that you don't do for your English written work?
You know what they say? It's not because you do marketing as a day job that you do the best marketing ever when it comes to selling yourself. I'm experimenting a lot with my books because my expertise as a marketeer lies with content marketing and SEO, not in paid advertising or social media, I run Facebook ads for my translated book, as I mentioned earlier, but something I do for the French translation that I didn't do for the original English version is in-person events. I went to my first ever Christmas market in December 22 as an author. I had a table with my books on it for the very first time. That was super exciting. I talked to people, sold 2 books, and that was it. The experience was thrilling, of course, and I did actually make my money back. The table cost €7.50, so it wasn't at all expensive. So selling 2 books was enough to get a positive return on investment. Another thing I did differently was that I advertised it in a shop. I got 8 book sales that way so far as we are recording this episode. And the only reason why I'm doing that for the French translation, but not the English version, is because I live in Belgium in an area where not many people speak English. So it makes more sense to do it in French than in English. It would simply not work for the English version.
If you could only pass on one thing to aspiring self-published writers, what's your best marketing tip or trick?
When preparing for this interview, I read the question out loud, and my husband said, "Make a viral video on TikTok and get rich." He cited there's an author who took 14 years writing a novel, and he didn't get a lot of sales when he published it, if at all. But one day, his daughter made a video on TikTok, got 36 million views, and got her dad's book in the top 10 best-selling books on Amazon. It would be a dream if it worked like that. Like posting one video and becoming famous in no time, it would be a complete dream, right? But marketing hardly works like that. So that's not a very good tip, but I thought it was worth mentioning anyway. Because it all comes down to your audience in a sense, right? Who are they? Where are they looking for new books? The advice I have here is be active and consistent on those platforms. You don't necessarily need to spend a ton of money on marketing to sell your book. You can do it organically. A simple video on social media could take your book to higher space, It could make your book a bestseller. But you won't know which video, which photo, which caption until it's out there in the world. So keep pushing and keep being consistent.
I saw that news article too, or I saw as a news article about the father who got all those sales. And the one thing that I took away from that was he spent 14 years writing that book and trying to sell it before he ever got to the point he did. So that gives us, I think, as self-published writers, that idea that, yeah, we could put out something that is good and it may not sell right now, but in 14 years, you might. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to throw in another question that I thought of when we were trying to figure out our questions for you for this interview, and then I forgot about it, which is what I thought was very interesting about the differences in the two books, the physical product, especially between your English language book and the French translation book. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
All right. So here I hold the two covers of, well, one is the English one and the other is the French version, right? What you can't really see when looking at them is that the French version is slightly bigger than the French version. I don't know what happened, but when I set up the book on Amazon, I set it up exactly the same way as I did with the English version, and for some reason it's a little bit bigger. Also, another difference is that it's lengthier, just because, you know, when translating a book in another language, depending on the language, you would have more words. So it sits at 151 pages, where the English language is at 143. So there's a slight difference in length as well. And as for the cover, I actually used the same cover as for the English one. So except for the subtitle, there is no real difference. And same with the back cover. I actually just translated the thing in French, and that was it.
Well, that's good to know that you can, you know, with a translation, you can keep the same cover, because I listen to a lot of podcasts like you do, and often I hear authors talking about their translations and how they have different covers for their translations. When you're already talking about putting out an expense to have your book translated, and then now you have to come up with a new cover, I'm glad that you were able to keep the same one and still, you know, be successful with it.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it's because I had the source file from the designer I worked with for the English one.
Nice.
Because without it, I would have had to contact her again or hire another cover designer.
So that's a tip there, that if you have a designer who creates your book, ask for the source file so that you can do more with it later.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are you working on next? And can you tell us about your next book and when it will come out?
Yes. So at the time of recording, I'm in the query trenches with a middle grade fantasy novel. So I don't know the exact date on when it's going to get released, because I have no view on the potential calendar for this book until I get representation and find a publishing house. However, I do know that if I don't find representation within a year of querying, I might simply self-publish it. Now, I know what you're going to say. It's difficult to self-publish a middle grade novel simply because the audience it's aimed at do not necessarily follow you or your content on social media or YouTube. They aren't subscribed to your newsletter, etc., because they're too young, right? So it's hard to reach your audience when self-publishing and marketing for middle grade. But it's not impossible. And I worked too hard on that book for it to simply sit in my drawer. So we will see in a year's time. I'm also editing a new memoir, but not a travel memoir this time. The topic is pregnancy and motherhood, because when I was looking for some books on the topic during my pregnancy, I couldn't find any positive story. So as I couldn't relate to any of those stories, I decided to write my own. It is supposed to be released later this year, maybe in September, maybe later. We will see. And because I'm never out of ideas, I'm supposed to start working on a YA dystopian trilogy this year. Still in the outlining stage though, so there's no release date yet.
And I've read your middle grade book because I happen to be one of your chosen beta readers, and I love it. So I hope it has a really great voice. I laughed, I don't know how many times throughout the novel. I really loved it. So I hope it gets into print, whether from traditionally publishing, which I hope that's the case for you, because I know that's your hope, or indie, if that's the route that you have to eventually go.
You, Shannon. It means the world.
So now we like to do something a bit different. We would love to do a round of rapid fire questions where you answer each question as quickly as possible. Are you game?
Yes.
Okay. So what comes first for you? The characters, the setting, or the plot?
The characters.
Morning or night writer?
Morning.
Planner, pantser, or plantser?
Definitely pantser.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Can you complete the sentence? The best thing about writing is?
That I don't know.
No worries.
Favorite book to read to your son?
Circle by Mac Barnett.
Least favorite genre to read?
Horror.
Favorite genre to read?
Fantasy.
A language you've always wanted to learn to translate in your next book?
Japanese.
Cool. I would love that too. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Well, that answers all of our questions that we have for you today. But before we wrap up, can you please tell our listeners where they can find you and purchase your books?
Sure. So you can find me via my website, vdvestelle.com, VDV standing for Van de Velde, where you will have all the links you need to find my social media and books. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and I'm self-publishing on Amazon. All the links will be in the show notes and in the description box below.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your insight and experience, especially into translating your own works.
It was a pleasure being here with you today. And so thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I was so very grateful when you reached out because I was just thinking about reaching out to you to come onto the podcast. And then I got your note. So I was like, yay.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much to our listeners and viewers. July 15th, we'll be back with another regular episode where we'll interview an author about their self-publishing and marketing journey. Goodbye, everybody.